but I'm a whole lawyer. So I will potentially go back to practicing law. I'm engaged in conversations with some law firms about what that would look like. I want to be semi flexible as it relates to the practice of law, because I absolutely want to get to this book.
What's going on, everybody? I want to pick up right where we've been because something just happened that really deserves a closer look. And I think once you hear it, you're going to understand why people are raising eyebrows about it. So there's a clip going around of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett talking about possibly stepping away from politics and going back into law, saying she's in conversations with firms and wants something flexible so she can also focus on writing the book. And on the surface, that might sound normal. People switch careers all the time, but let's be real for a second. When someone goes from holding public office to suddenly talking about lining up their next move like this, people start asking questions about what's really going on behind the scenes, what changed and why now. Because from my perspective, this isn't just about one person's career decision. It's about a bigger pattern we've been seeing where politicians come in strong, make a lot of noise, and then when things don't go the way they expected, the tone shifts and the priorities change. And that's where everyday people start to feel disconnected from the people who are supposed to represent them. Because while regular Americans are dealing with rising costs, job stability, and real world consequences of policy decisions, the people in charge can pivot and move on pretty quickly. And that gap is what frustrates a lot of voters. So what I want to do is break down what was actually said, what this looks like in real life, and why people are reacting the way they are, because there's more to this than just a career move. And I think it says a lot about the current state of politics and accountability. So we're going to get into it, look at the bigger picture, and connect the dots in a way that actually makes sense. Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and check this out.
When an illegal immigrant kills your children than it does an American, because it was preventable. It feels different. Now that I know that because I have had an American kill a child, but when something's preventable and your life is ruined from something that's preventable, it does hit a little different than what I would imagine it would feel like just a regular casualty. Loss in itself is so difficult. There's no words. Loss is loss. It is very tragic. What we're dealing with when it's preventable, when these people have done something and they weren't asked to leave. If I were to go to Honduras, where the woman who killed our children is from, and I would kill 2 teenagers there, I'm not getting any rights from the Hondurans. They're not giving me rights. It's different. This is preventable. So I think it does hit a little different when our tragedy is preventable.
Around my head or something, and so therefore I am going to somehow be precluded from harm becoming me. When I go out to do policy work, and I've worked on the state level too, the policies that I was writing when I was on the state level are different from the federal level because we have different levels of control. The one thing that we do have control of, you may have recognized that the DHS secretary, as we're talking about immigration, she had to come before this committee. I want to say maybe a day or 2 after she came before our committee, because we have jurisdiction over her. We don't have jurisdiction over your mayors. We have jurisdiction over her. She lost her job. The DHS secretary is gone. Now, to be clear about this, the Republican president is the one that put her out of her job because she was failing. So the reason that my colleagues have brought these things up, and this isn't to say that the harm and the hurt that you are feeling, that you should not be feeling that. It is wrong. Again, even as a criminal defense attorney, I can't tell you how many times I was begging clients to enter pleas. In fact,
before we get into that, I think it's worth saying that was one of the most disgusting testimonies I have ever heard. To have Hank come in here and lecture angel families about how they shouldn't be here, how we shouldn't be holding this hearing. What the hell is wrong with you guys? The reason they're here is because of open borders that you guys perpetrated for 4 years. And to come in here and to turn this into a MAGA Republican idiotic low IQ lecture is sickening. To whine about which seats they're in. It's disgusting.
All right, so let's get into what was actually said, why people are reacting so strongly to it, because this is where things start to feel off for a lot of folks watching this unfold. So you have a grieving parent talking about losing a child in a situation they believe could have been prevented it. Um, and regardless of where you stand politically, that kind of loss is real. It's heavy, and most people expect a basic level of empathy in that moment, just human to human. And from my perspective, that's where the situation starts to break down, because instead of keeping the focus on the lost and the concern being raised about it being preventable and it being prevented, about, let's focus on policy surrounded around that and a concern being raised, the conversation shifts into something more defensive and political. And this is where a lot of viewers feel like the response doesn't match the moment, because let's be real for a second. When someone is talking about losing a child, most Americans aren't thinking about party lines. They're thinking about accountability, and rather something could have been handled differently. And this is where the immigration debate gets very real, because it's not just numbers or headlines. It shows up in communities. It shows up in cities dealing with strained resources, overwhelmed systems, and in some cases, serious public safety concerns. And again, from my perspective, pointing that out isn't about attacking people. It's about asking what responsibility government has to prevent avoidable harm. Because that's the core of the argument being made here. Whether you agree with it or not, and to be fair, there are people on the other side who will say immigration is complex, that enforcement has to be balanced with humanitarian concerns, and that not every situation could be controlled at the federal level. And that's a real argument. But this is where it doesn't add up for a lot of Americans, because when policies lead to outcomes that people feel could have been prevented, the expectation is that leaders acknowledge that concern clearly and directly, not shift around it. And this is where the frustration grows, because it starts to feel like the system is more focused on protecting itself than addressing what people are actually worried about. I have a mentor, and I was told this, and this can go just for leadership roles and just human life. This is just life advice. The difference that sets the difference between the greats and the average person is the average person whines, talks negative, and continues to blame and deflect. The greats get to it and they talk solutions, right? And I'll quote that, and I'll also say that also comes from a very, very strong statement from a motivational speaker named Eric Thomas. Go check him out. He's amazing, and being inspirational and encouraging people to change their lives around and take positive actions, and being informed and stuff like that. But I say all that to say that when you zoom out, this isn't just about one hearing or one exchange. This is about a bigger conversation happening across the country. In places like New York City, dealing with migrant housing costs, in Chicago, where resources are being stretched, and border states managing surges that impact local communities, right? This is what it looks like in real life. Policies turning into real pressure on real people, and real solutions to take heed to that, because that's what the greats do in leadership roles, policymakers, your public officials, right? And when those concerns aren't addressed in a way that feels grounded and accountable, trust starts to erode. And that's what you're seeing here. People reacting not to just what was said, but how it was said and what it represents. And that's why this moment is getting attention, because it highlights the gap between policy decisions and how they actually play out for everyday Americans. Now, I want you guys to check out this last clip.
What will you do after your next term? There is no next term. This is the term. So my term ends in January. I'm gonna be doing a few things here and there. Some of what I've done as I've been kind of off the radar is engage in conversations. I just want to point out to y'all that prior to coming to Congress, I know it drives MAGA crazy, but I'm a whole lawyer. So I will potentially go back to practicing law. I'm engaged in conversations with some law firms about what that would look like. I want to be semi-flexible as it relates to the practice of law, because I absolutely want to get to this book. That will be, it'll feel like a thriller to me, child, because I've lived this life. But I definitely want to get to this book. We've had publishers that have reached out for some time, wanting me to do a book for a very long time. We also have some podcast conversations that we'll be engaging in. We'll see about political commentating. I would love to show up in the classroom and actually do a little professor thing here and there. The sky is the limit. So we're kind of going to be doing a little bit of everything. Many of you know that I have traveled this country endlessly on behalf of other people, other organizations, that kind of stuff. And I'm still doing a little bit of that. I am scaling back a lot because one of the things that I realized is that I've been going and going and going, and I had not been taking care of myself. But for instance, this weekend, I'll be in Chicago. I've got to do some speaking. So I will continue to speak as well. Yeah. And we'll do some things around politics for sure. I'll figure out which way I want to play, but I want to make sure that we have real people. And I think an area that I want to really get involved in when it comes to politics is the disinformation game that comes into play. The disinformation game allowed for Trump to get back into office. And the disinformation game allowed for a lot of lies to permeate as if they were truth in my race. And I just don't want that. Like, I just want people to have real information. So lots of education and, doing whatever I can to thwart the misinformation and disinformation that puts us into really bad positions.
Now, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture here, because this isn't just about one clip or one moment. It ties into how people view leadership, accountability, and the role of public officials overall. So when you hear someone in office talking about what comes next for them, whether it's going back into law, writing a book, or moving into media, that's not unusual by itself. A lot of politicians do that, but here's where it stands out to people. It's the tone and timing combined with everything we just talked about. And from my perspective, that's what makes people question priorities. Because the expectation most Americans have is simple. If you are in office, your focus should be on the people you represent first, especially when serious issues like public safety and immigration policy are being debated in real time. And this is where it connects back to something deeper, which is trust in institutions. Because when trust starts to slip, people begin to look at everything more critically, how leaders speak, how they respond to criticism, and how they present themselves. And that includes authenticity. Because let's be real, people can usually tell when something feels genuine versus when it feels like a performative performance. And in today's political environment, that matters more than ever. Now, to be fair, there are people who will argue that communication styles shouldn't be overanalyzed, that what matters most is policy outcomes and legislative work. And that's a reasonable point. But this is where it doesn't fully add up for a lot of viewers, because how something is communicated often shapes how it's received, especially when emotions are already high around issues like crime, border security, and economic pressure. And this is where we can zoom out even further and tie this into the Constitution and the role of the government, because at its core, the federal government has a responsibility to provide for the common defense and maintain order. That's one of the foundational expectations going all the way back to the founders. And from a conservative point of view, that includes enforcing immigration law in a way that protects citizens while still respecting the legal process. And when that balance feels off, whether it's at the border or in major cities dealing with the downstream effects, people notice. You see it in places like New York, where resources are being stretched, Chicago dealing with budget pressure, and border communities facing challenges that directly impact daily life. This is what policy looks like when it leaves Washington and hits the ground. And that's why these conversations matter, because they're not abstract, right? They're not just out of thin air. They affect real people in real situations. And at the same time, it's important to acknowledge that immigration policy is complex. There are legal, humanitarian, and economic layers to it, and reasonable people can disagree on how to handle it. But where a lot of frustration comes in is when it feels like those concerns aren't being addressed directly or clearly, and instead the focus shifts elsewhere. And this is where you start to see a disconnect grow between leadership and the public. So when people watch moments like this, they're not just reacting to one statement. They're reacting to what it represents, which is a broader concern about priorities, accountability, and whether the system's actually working the way it's supposed to. Because then it leads to the question, and I'll close here, was Jasmine Crockett, in that moment that I showed you guys in the second clip, was she focused still being in her government role as a public official, even though it's up in January. She's still entitled. She's still subjected to do her job, subjected by the job description to be for the people. So the disconnect comes where, okay, well, you just basically were solid, very concerning situation where the conversation is of a citizen, American citizen, let alone a child, just a child in general, human to human, right? We're talking humanity. Take away the race, take away the MAGA, take away the Trump, take away the political theaters, and just in a humanly matter, could this have been preventable based on policies and how to prevent this moving forward for the betterment of all communities? Dismissed and slide that off and basically brush that off her shoulder like ice, but quick enough to address how she's moving forward within her own self-absorbment on where she's going, branching off, even though her work is not done because she's still on her job. And you get what I'm saying, family? So my question is, wouldn't that be the disconnect that people are in dire frustration of or extreme frustration of because of this constant, the actions itself that we just see be displayed of why accountability and whether the system is actually working the way it's supposed to is being questioned, right? And what I have learned is if you want to be successful anywhere in life, remove Jasmine Crockett, remove everything we talked about. Or we could just let Jasmine Crockett be an example. I have learned that you can be caught up in self-absorbment when you're so busy trying to convince people. And convincing, in my definition, is convincing is basically you trying to make someone do what you want them to do, what you want them to do, and what you believe in. Persuasion, right? If she really wants to connect with the people and be for the people, you will persuade them. And persuasion goes in this way. I'm not convincing you to do anything, but if anything, I am working with you while already offering a solution with the goal that you already have in mind directly where you're trying to get to. So in this case, the hearing was about seeing the prevent move forward in the question of it being preventable, but also policies around it that can be proposed or continue to push the envelope for the conversation to move forward for actions to take place, let alone the process and mapping things out for another child not to go through that humanly horrifying event. Because this is bigger, right? Unfortunately, and my heart goes out to that mother that was at the hearing who lost her child. But then also we're talking about saving future children as well. Even though it's a complex situation with immigration and law enforcement and things like that. But there still has to be a productive conversation that can still be upheld. Two things can be true at the same time. So what I'm saying is when you're so self-absorbed of convincing, you can't even leave with persuasion to actually give a service and be of service as a public official to the people. There's no difference between a salesman, right? If they're so convinced, so busy convincing someone to sell a sale because in their mind they just want to make a sale to get paid, you're going to fail. But if you're actually you're not convincing them to do anything, but if anything, you're persuading them and just influencing them directly to continue to go in the direction they're going because they already said, hey, I'm looking for so-and-so. I'm looking for mentorship. Okay, so if you have a mentorship network or a business, you're basically persuading them to take heed and seek get information in regards of what are you offering to help them get further where they already were already going. So you're just persuading them and persuading or influencing them to continue to go in the direction they already have set before them. They already knew they were going. You're just supporting them with that influence, and you're just adding more value, which is a solution that they would pay any amount of money for because you're solving a solution that they want to be, they value, that they want handled so much that anybody would pay anything. See, everybody spends money. But the thing is, we spend money for convenience, right? And if the convenience is I can get a mentorship to push me further, because then all the mistakes and stuff I can bypass that was already done before me to continue to do things correctly. And it saves me time where I can buy back my time for the better convenient solution wise for the direction I'm going. I'll take that persuasion. And that's a successful salesperson, because instead of being a service of self and self-absorbent, you're actually being of service for the people and not for self. So you have to take yourself out of it. And that seems to be the challenge that's displayed here. Not attacking Jasmine Crockett, but based on the characteristic of what's displayed and how the fella, Mr. Gill, felt that it was disgusting how we're sitting here talking about prevention and immigration, and you're talking about MAGA and Trump and things like that. But let me know what you guys think. I just want to have a productive conversation. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Give this video a big thumbs up. On that note, family, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.